no-brainer, right? The 50 moving average got hit and it's bouncing, no-brainer here. How far of a bounce? Right now, I could think of it as can go all the way up to this number 4025 on the ES. So probably I think right now the SPX is about 5 points behind, 5 to 6 points behind on from ES. So if ES goes and hits this 4025, then probably SPX should be somewhere about 4020 to 4019, and that makes sense. Yesterday 4019 was acting as a decent support for SPX. Now it should act as decent resistance, right? That's the immediate trade if you're into that. And here, this thing, the RSI is oversold, so bounce was pretty much there. Williams R is oversold, so bounce was pretty much there. Now, I think this is an ephemeral bounce based on how it is behaving, and this bounce makes sense because of this guy as well, right? It is hitting this bottom here and is trying to bounce. If you want to confirm that bounce, I'm going to go here, and it makes sense for it to bounce, right? So this bounce right here for Apple, 5, 8, if that clears, very likely it's going to go hit this number, 149.62. If that clears, then very likely it's going to revert to the mean at about 150.20 area, right? That clears, then I think we should witness if it clears the mean and the half trend, the super trend here. That means we have some strength and might go all the way up to this number here at 150.50 area. 150, wherever this 200 moving average is on the hour for Apple, that's what we are trying to get to. And if it clears there, then we look forward for further upside. If not, we just leave it alone here, right? This makes sense, and probably once this gets resolved, the lower time frame, that will start to push to the downside again. MFI is still down here all the way. It is still oversold, so we might witness the MFI go up a little bit. So that means if SPX bounces right till here again, 4017, then we'll look forward for a hit of 4020. That clears. We're likely to push all the way up here. Where is that? Maybe up to this number 4028, but this is the one that I'm watching right here, 4024, 4025 area, the 50 EMA on the daily. So while coming down, this was acting as pretty decent bounce spot yesterday, and now it's acting as it should act as pretty decent resistance. That clears, then we are looking for a further push, probably into 4052 to 4056. This is very I think this is a hard ask today. I think even if it bounces all the way up here or even up here to 4050 to 4055 area, this will be shorted if it gets all the way up here. Even if it gets to the 8 on the daily at 4076, I think it will be shorted again. And I don't see a reason for it to move all the way up till here, 4075. If if the interest rates are to believe, right now it is coming down, and we'll go into this chart as well, US 10. Right now it's coming down, and DXY came down from hitting that support, hitting that resistance line, and we are getting a bounce here. Fair enough. So let's say the FOMC minutes come in. There's nothing really that will be outstanding, or there's nothing really that will come out of the minutes that we already don't know about, right? We know there are three more rate hikes at least. So and very likely, I think it will push into 5.5%. Currently, they are about 4.75. I think there are three more hikes coming in. And I think major institutions were pricing another one hike. Some were pricing in two hikes. Now they are pricing in pretty much three hikes. So that would put us at 5.5, very likely, right? So I think that's what the interest rates projection or the FOMC minutes will tell us. I don't think there's anything new about it. So now let's say if the minutes say that okay, they are thinking about three more hikes at least, right? So then what? The market, obviously you will see the yields go up, then the market will react very likely to the downside. How much of a downside? I don't know that at this point. Depends on Apple and Microsoft, right? Apple and Microsoft both looking like they want to bounce. So let's say if they bounce pre-FOMC, then very likely they'll fade, post-FOMC. That's pretty much the idea here. Cool. So this bounce here was pretty much, given, and if it goes up all the way here, this thing, what is this, RSI, and then crosses this line here, just like this, then very likely we'll see further bounce. If not, it will very likely go up to this number and start to fade. So that's what I'm watching, and I'll be looking at this chart very likely to make my trades. And I will be trading very light because this is starting to squeeze, and I am not a big fan of squeezes, right? Because you don't know which way it's going to break. So yeah, so I'll be watching this trade, and I'll be very likely playing very light today. Uh, and obviously, if the FOMC comes in, we there's nothing new that FOMC will tell us, rather FOMC meetings will tell us, meeting minutes will tell us. But then if the market deems that, three further rate hikes as negative for the risk assets, then very likely we'll see probably 1 to 1.5% downside. And most of that downside was priced in yesterday itself, right? Most of the downside was priced in yesterday itself. So probably we'll see about to the downside probably 1%. Actually, I think 1%. But just in case, if the market moves further down, 1.5%. As of now, where things stand, I'm not really projecting anything sub 1.5%. I think 1%, but 1.5% is I will use that as a buffer. Right. So to the downside, to the upside, let's say if it goes up and hits this number right here, 40.25, 40.26, this is where I would exit the trade if I'm in a call trade. This is where I'll exit that trade. And if that clears, very likely, this is what we want to see first, right? The 50 moving average to the upside, 40.19 area. And this is acting as pretty decent resistance right now. It's hitting that 40.20 and trying to clear that number. Unless this number clears, I'm not really looking forward for that upside. Very likely it's going to come back up here and test this number again. If this number clears at 40.19, 40.20, then I would look for this resistance about 40.25, 40.26. If that clears, then very likely I'll go up all the way here into 40.32. Then if somehow it goes up here and goes all the way up here till 40.37, 40.39 area, if I'm in calls, this is where I will take a hard exit. Right, the 8 on the weekly, if it hits there, I will take a hard exit on my calls here. And very likely I'll start another position with probably SPXL or SPXQ. Depends on where Apple would be. But very likely this is where I'll take a hard exit on my calls or the upside trades. And for some reason, if it does clear, I don't know if it, I don't think it's going to clear that 40.38, 40.40 level. But for some reason, if it does go up there and clear that number, then very likely it's going to go hit this number, 40.54 area. I don't believe that's going to happen, but just for the sake of projecting, we're going to project it that way, right? So the path here is about 40.20. If that clears, then 40.26. If that clears, then 40.32. If that clears, very likely 40.38 to 40.40. Done and done after that. And unless Apple starts to move further upside, which I doubt, which I highly doubt, but for some reason Apple clears that upside and starts to move into that 150 to 152, and very likely we'll start to see SPX clear above the weekly 8, then probably push into weekly 5. But I'm not holding my breath on this. Yeah, and if it does hit this weekly 8, I'll very likely take a hard exit on my upside trade. Cool thing. All right, and Apple will get in a minute, but let's go here over into DXY. DXY is hitting this number right here, upper inner Bollinger Band, taking a breather. Nothing outstanding actually. It's a pretty common trade here. But if it does come back here into this 104.40 area, and if it does clear that 104.40 number, then we are expecting it to hit this 104.88. I'm not really plotting anything above this 104.88. And I think if it does come back up till 104, I doubt if it will come back up till this 104.88. Probably if it does come up, let's put a range here, 104.75 to 104.88. 104.75 because this line is here, right? And that's the reason I'm saying it might not reach up to that 104.80 area, because there is a 5 and an 8 sitting right here on the monthly chart, which will very likely prohibit DXY from moving further up in above 104.70 area. However, if it does clear this 104.70 to 104.75 area, and very likely it's going to push all the way up into 104.88 area, and then very likely we'll see a push to the downside from that. By the time it reaches this 104.70 area, 104.88 area, I think a lot of damage would have been already done on the SPX side of things. And hopefully we should be able to catch some of that to the downside. Right, and DXY on the daily chart, 5 is still sitting at about 103.99, 103.95 area, and should DXY take this path to the downside, and and how will we look at that? We want to look at this, right? We were projecting US 10 to hit this number, 3.96 to 3.98. It is hitting this 3.96 number and taking a breather from there. How deep of a breather would that be? Very likely, if it starts to push to the downside, we will see it come back here into this upper inner Bollinger Band for a bounce. That is sitting right now at about 3.83 to 3.85, or rather 3.83. Yeah, 3.83, 3.82. I would, well, let's expand this and see where it is. 3.84 to 3.83, right? So that's the range if it comes back down. So that's about 10%, 10 basis points from where it is right now. And if US 10 take this path to the downside, very likely it will pull the DXY again with it to the downside, and I think DXY will come back down and test this 5, right? And if DXY tests this 5, very likely we'll see some bounce in SPX, and very likely if the bounce comes down into, let's say, Apple and Tesla bounces, then very likely we'll see that SPX bounce into that 40.32 to 40.40 range, right? Yeah, so let's see here, and then you want to check this guy, Microsoft. Well, let's get into Apple first. Apple to the upside, well, this was pretty much expected out of Apple actually, right? Weekly 5 hit of that and probably hold that, and right now it's holding that, fair enough. And if that breaches, very likely it's going to come back down to this number, 146.67. And to the upside, if it bounces, it's going to go up all the way here to 149.80. Very likely it's going to hit that, take a breather, then after that, if that clears, 150.20. Not really plotting anything above this 50 moving average for Apple as of now. If Apple does clear this number, then we'll reassess the whole situation to the upside. But if Apple comes back down, reaches this number here, the 5 on the week, then we're expecting the 50 EMA on the week to get tested about 147.70, 147.70 area, yeah, 147.70. And then this is where the critical fight will be, the 200 moving average for Apple. Even if it comes down here, very likely we're going to experience a bounce. And why the bounce? Because this guy, the trigger RSI, is at the bottom, and if we just need to hit a major moving average, that will bounce. And that's something that you want to keep an eye on, right? It could bounce here, it could bounce here, or it could bounce here. Either of those values it could bounce. After this bounce, I think it should bounce, and the bounce, I don't know how far that bounce will last. Very likely it will come back up into this mean which is sitting at about 149.40, 149.50 right now. And probably, maybe even if it goes up all the way here at 151, and still I will be looking to short this thing after that bounce, right? Till this thing is crossed to the downside, I will be looking forward for that short to extend, right? That's the idea here. It's just crossed there, and we just got one bar to the downside. And probably, this is what I'll be looking at. And if this, if we get another full bar here, then very likely we'll assume that there is strength to the downside, and the velocity of the move would very likely, accelerate if the 200 moving average on the day breaches to the downside. And yeah, and yesterday the idea was that the SQ equity trade or ETF, whatever you want to call SQ or SPXL or TNA, whichever you like. That was the idea, to take that because of those bounces coming from Apple, hitting the mean, hitting this 21. So Apple kept bouncing, and we kept getting those bounces. And if you were an SQ trade, that was very smooth. Yeah, so you did not have to get in and out. And I think the same thing should happen. Even if it bounces here, I'll go take a look at the SPXS or SQs or TNAs. Right? Either of those should work, and as and when this starts to take shape to the downside, you can actually increase your position in those ETFs. And if you want to hedge that ETF or that position, you can just simply take zero DTEs calls, and you can hedge that position, right? So that's the way that you want to trade it. And one another thing, my usually I see that the first people's first intuition is to get into zero DTs. My last intuition is to get into zero DTs. So that's why I look at first. I think 4 weeks out, 5 weeks out, 1 month out. Depends on how this thing is going, right? Depends on how this thing is going. I yesterday I was when it was hitting this five, I was taking March 31st, 3,000 puts, 3,200 puts. Yesterday I went to April 15, April 14, and then I got some April 28th, 3,200 puts, 3,500 puts, right? So the idea here is again to wait for two things will happen. Two things will happen. Now you know the negative sentiment is there, right? That's the first thing. Why is that important? Negative sentiment helps the IV increase, right? And the negative sentiments, whenever, or rather sentiment, negative or positive. Right now, the sentiment is negative, and you go down the chain and pick up some of those farther dated options. The IV will expand for every point or 10 point it moves there. The what do you call the option will move by about at least 10%, right? So that's how you want to look at things. The idea is not for the option to get in the money, but for your premium to increase. And according to your risk profile, I just look for somewhere between, let's say 25% to 50%. And anytime I get 100% on any of those trades, I simply either trim or exit. And zero DTEs is my last sort of resort. If I am looking for, maybe a quick in and out sort of a trade, that's when I get into zero DTEs. I trade zero DTEs, better, but it's just not for somebody who is not in front of the screen all the time, or who doesn't have multiple screens, or who's trading on a phone. They can't focus on what's happening around. So with the markets, so the zero DTE for me is like okay, if I want to get involved with something that I'm already hedged with, then that's the kind of thing. Or if there is a very clear move like yesterday, it was a very clear move to the downside, it made sense to get involved with zero DTEs. Even then, the zero DTEs were my last resort to go to, right? That's how I trade. But I don't want to create a bias with respect to the picking up expiration dates or picking up strikes. It's up to you and your risk profile. But this is how I analyze things, and this is what I'm watching right now. And it's just not us. It's just not us. Pretty much, every major market participants who look at technicals is watching this trade right here. If it goes to the downside, like it did here to the upside, the same thing. Very likely all the position traders who got in here have already exited here, right? And this is the line where very likely we're going to get another push to the upside. This will decide whether that push will last or not, right? Cool. And any given bounce, I'll be looking to trade to the downside, even this one. And bounce is pretty much imminent because you're seeing this right here, right? So that's where the chop will come from. And last time it did this, it bounced, right? So similar kind of thing. Even if it doesn't bounce, way too much, all the way up to even 50%, now 50 here on the RSI. Even if it doesn't do that, even if it does like a 25, that will still be a bounce, and your put premiums will get crushed if you're on the wrong side of that trade. Cool. Right. And let's get into Microsoft a little bit here. Right. So this is what is happening with Microsoft on the week. 5 reached, 8 hit, and bounce. Now, if it starts to bounce to the upside, very likely it's going to go hit the 5 again. If the 5 clears to the upside, then we'll reassess the situation. Right now, I think it is trying to clear that 253.80, 253.90. Then very likely it's going to go up all the way here to test the mean on the upside now. However, if you're looking at this chart here, very likely all the positional traders who got in a position here have already exited that trade, right? So two things, the 5 is detached and this thing is all the way down at the bottom. So we might get another bounce here. Very likely either the bounce could come right from here, 200 moving average, and the bounce could last very well into this 257.30 area. The mean reversion from the bottom, that clears, very likely it's going to go push all the way up into the 5. I doubt this would happen. I think the 5 will have to come back down, the technicals will have to come back down. But if it clears here, then if it clears here, the 5 on the week, then very likely scenario, it's going to go hit this 21 and the mean on the day to 57.45 to 57.50. Let's reassess the situation to the upside if it clears here, and to the downside, if it can't clear this 253.50 area, then we are looking for a push down here into 250.45 to 50.50. That breaches, very likely we're going to see 248.80. Then we are looking for a bounce here at 248.50 area, right? This is where my downside is, 250 roughly, and upside is right here at the 5, 253.70, 253.80. If that clears, then we are looking at a push into 256 to 57, 256, 90 to 257, right? So that's the Microsoft trade, and let's go here and just to look at this trade one more time. RSI to the downside, so very likely we might see at least a push to the upside here. And let's look at Apple. If Apple is doing the same thing, there you go. If Apple and Microsoft MFIs push to the upside, then very likely you'll see SPX push to the upside as well. Let's get into a bit of Tesla, and then just to go back, right? We saw this thing right here, and we know what happened for that bounce. So yeah, let's see how it plays out. This was half a cycle. The MFI did not go all the way up here, but the but it still pushed to the upside, right? So we'll see what happens here. 5 clears, 8 clears. The mean reversion is right here, about 254.50 area. If the mean reversion completes, then very likely it's going to go hit this number at 255.50. And very likely I'll try to short it right here at 254.60 to 54.70. That clears, very likely it's going to go push here into 255.50 area. Then probably another shorting opportunity. Yeah, I think the bounce. I think I'll be careful both to the downside and to the upside. Careful to the downside because of the lower time frame, especially the 1 hour is oversold. Cautious to the upside because this chart still wants to push to the downside, right? So immediate trade probably is looking for an upside, and once it hits either here or here at 256.20 area, then probably short it. That's the idea. Tesla to the downside, if it happens today, then it'll come back very likely into this number at 189.70 area. That's about 9 points from where it is right now. I hope it doesn't happen today. I hope that it just doesn't flush to the downside and hit that 189, 188 area. Basically the 21 on the weekly. I hope it doesn't happen. But to the downside, that's what you're looking at, and to the upside, 211 to 211.50. That's the upside area, about 11 points. That chart is very inconclusive. So let's go here. Right. To the downside, you are still expected to hit this number. At least try and come back down to this number. Right. Might not happen immediately, but this number is still a valid number. Unlike Apple and Microsoft, this hasn't hit the bottom yet. Right. So it is still expected to hit the bottom at some point in time. Maybe it is not doing so because of the expected Tesla investor day or something of that sort. There might be a big announcement that comes out. and this thing again flash in a flash it will be here at 223 right now, right? So that I think that's one reason that's playing on people's mind. However, we went long here. Everybody who went up who would have went long here probably is out here. All right, if technical traders are, who trade on technicals, very likely the positional traders who took a position here are out here. So if the selling continues, this will cross to the downside, and we'll see our first red bar today, hopefully. And then very likely it's going to go hit this number right here at the upper inner Bollinger Band, 195.30, 195, 195.30 to 195 area, and then we bounce. The bounce could very well last here into the daily 8 to 150. Then probably if that clears, then 203. Right, so that's the upside. If that clears, then we'll push all the way up here into 207. Depends on how Apple and Microsoft behaves. And to the downside, if it clears here, 194, 195. It's right now 194.96, but let's round it up at 195. That breaches, then very likely is going to come back down here into 186, 187, 80. Probably, I don't want to see this happen today. 10 points, 12 points of downside. Uh, so maybe it will come back here and hold here at around 195, and if that breaches, very likely it's a story for tomorrow or day after that the mean reversion will happen at about 187.80 area. Cool thing. Let's go here into 1 hour chart for Tesla. Right, similar situation. The MFI is all the way down here, and it would have been ideal that Tesla would have come down into this 200 moving average and hit that and bounce, right? But it is not doing that. Maybe it will do that after the market open and comes back down and hits this number right about here, 195.30, probably 195 area bounce, and then probably go back up into wherever this line will be. Then try and come back up into that line. Right now it's at 198. Probably it might be a bit down after the open or after the new candle shows up. And if that bounces into, wherever the 5 would be, 5, then the 8, right? 198.78 is 8 right now. If that clears, very likely we're going to see it push all the way up here into this 201 area. And if Apple shows strength and Microsoft shows strength, then mean reversion will happen for Tesla at 202.67. Right, and to the downside, very likely we're going to see this number get tested, and we're going to see it hold this line, especially if Apple holds. Very likely we're going to see this hold, Tesla hold this 194.90, 195 area, and then we'll look for another bounce there. Cool thing. Anything else in particular we are looking at? I want to see Netflix. Uh, yeah, I think it is still vulnerable to the downside. Very likely it's going to test this number, 334. And this is why MACD is super important, right? Once the MACD crosses, even if it tries to bounce, very likely it will start to pull down. Why? Because the positional traders who would have taken a position at the cross here, they would have exited very likely the trade here, right? The selling seems to continue and it starts to push to the downside. That's the idea there. Nothing more than that. Cool thing. And if it comes down here at 333.70, 333.50, I think it's going to bounce here. First bounce, that breaches, very likely it's going to go down here into this number, 329. Yeah, about 329. Yep. Cool thing. And we are looking for a bounce. We are looking for a bounce based on this chart here. And then probably even if it comes down here, then we look for another bounce there. How far of a bounce? Might be, it might last all the way up here into, I don't know, well, let's go here into the 1 hour chart. Let's see what it is doing here. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, because if Apple bounces, I'm pretty sure this is going to bounce too. It's going to clear this 338.20, then very likely 338.56, and to the upside 340 to 341 area. That's the upside, and this is the downside, about 333.80. Cool thing. All right. Anything in particular? Anybody? All right. Let's move into live trading.